Do you know how dumb the world is right now, geopolitically? Up is down, day is night, black is white. The United States just sided with Russia in the UN Security Council, literally undoing more than half a century of foreign policy positions. The United States just refused to co-sign a resolution condemning Russia and blaming it for the crisis in Ukraine. I thought that South Africa was in huge trouble with the United States for being too soft on Russia and Ukraine, for being too close to Moscow. I thought that was part of the reason why the US Republican MAGA right has been so upset with us for years. They said as much on the record over and over and over again. And now that's happening. Oh, and also President Ramaphosa has invited Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy for a state visit to South Africa. So let's try and unpack this absolute era-defining earthquake going on in world geopolitics because of Donald Trump and what it means for South Africa. This is the issue with everything changing geopolitically and South Africa's place in it. Welcome to The Issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is a movie. You're on the watch party. And before we get into this massive story, Suzuki, they blessed me with a gorgeous 5-door Jimny a few months ago that I love so much. My first ever car. I've brought it back to Cape Town where I've moved now. I commute between Cape Town and Joburg to do the various shows. And this car has allowed me to fall in love with and explore and create new relationships with my city and the surrounding areas of the Western Cape and the Peninsula in ways that I was never able to before when I couldn't drive and didn't have a car like this of my own. These are shots of me going to Assegai Bush, which is one of my favorite protected nature areas in and around the Western Cape. And it was just such a pleasure to go there again and to go there in this car that was absolutely purpose-built for this kind of adventure. So thank you, Suzuki. And just in case you still don't know, we cover all unfolding stories in South Africa and concerning South Africa every weekday on our weekday morning news podcast, Dan Corder in the Morning. You can go listen to it on Apple, Spotify. We're absolutely everywhere. Just search Dan Corder in the Morning. Okay, to truly understand how insane the last 2 weeks have been, we need a little bit of historical context. So, during apartheid, the Soviet Union, as it was then called, now Russia, was one of the apartheid struggle movement's most powerful allies. Kwanto where the ANC in exile were supported, enabled, resourced by lots and lots of places and countries, but particularly by the Soviet bloc. And so there's been a relationship because, in case you didn't know, and Americans love to forget this, but America and Britain were awfully chill with apartheid in terms of real policy and support, awfully okay with the apartheid government for a very, very, very long time. This was during the Cold War, where America and the Soviet Union were meddling in every country in the world to try and expand their sphere of influence, their sway, their power, as they kind of fought with each other without ever actually firing shots at each other. So in any country in the world, if the party or the organization, the body in power were supported by America, the opposition would be supported by the Soviet Union and vice versa. Then in the late 80s, early 90s, the Berlin Wall fell, the Cold War came to an end, America and capitalism won, the Soviet Union and communism lost. The Soviet Union was broken up a bit, but the vast majority of it became Russia. Also in the early 90s, apartheid fell and the ANC took power in South Africa. And ever since then, America has taken a broadly distrusting position against Russia, a hangover from the Cold War, and particularly as Vladimir Putin, who's been Russia's leader for a very, very long time now, has taken what America sees as more and more aggressive expansionist steps to try and rebuild the Soviet Union and undermine America. At the same time, South Africa has broadly had a policy, an international relations foreign policy position of try and be friends with everybody. We need as many trading partners, political partners, support, investment, allies as possible. And so South Africa broadly across different presidents from the African National Congress have gone, we're going to be mates with everybody. South Africa enjoys very good trade relations with the United States of America, and also South Africa is a part of BRICS, one of the founding members of BRICS, which includes Russia, China, India, and Brazil. Then 3 years ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, and the war between them has been raging ever since. The United States came out with a hard condemnation of Russia, supported Ukraine aggressively with resources, funding, political sway, had Zelenskyy over for state visits, and constantly tried to pressure Russia to stop the fighting, instituted sanctions against Russia and its leaders, pressured any country that showed support for Russia, even softly or with actual resources, the likes of Iran and North Korea. And South Africa, on the other hand, had largely a we listen, we don't judge approach to Russia and Ukraine. South Africa said that they wanted peace. The South African government, through the ANC, consistently said that they wanted to find a peaceful resolution and did not pick a side. And that enraged the United States of America. All of the United States of America's political establishment, but particularly the Republican, MAGA, Trump loyalist right wing, who tried to put through resolutions to review all of America and South Africa's kind of like trade relations and political relationships. You may remember that a little while ago there was the huge scandal with the Lady R ship, the Russian boat that was docked in Simonstown in Cape Town in South Africa, and the US ambassador alleged that arms were being smuggled onto the ship to be taken back to Russia through South Africa. There was a whole diplomatic incident, and suddenly all of these American politicians were saying we need to punish South Africa for their anti-American position, or in a position which is counter to American foreign interests because of their involvement in BRICS and because of our relationship with Russia. And that, along with South Africa's stance on Israel-Palestine in the International Court of Justice, and the wave of misinformation and fake news that certain South Africans have been able to spread amongst American political elites about the alleged awful treatment of white South Africans, particularly farmers, that the Russia mess, plus those other two reasons, are broadly considered to be the reasons why Donald Trump came out, and one of the first things that he did was say that terrible things were happening in South Africa and everything was going wrong, and they were going to cancel funding and they were going to review everything else. And the American political establishment seemed incredibly serious about punishing South Africa. All these B-list, mid-tier politicians from the Republican Party started saying inflammatory, baseless things about South Africa. America decided to boycott the G20, which South Africa is the host of this year. So America said that they wouldn't come to this massive and deeply influential, important meeting of most of the most powerful countries in the world because South Africa was hosting it, and bad South Africa is doing terrible things. And then, stunningly, American President Donald Trump started parroting, copy-pasting Russian talking points justifying Russia's actions against Ukraine. He said that it was actually Ukraine's fault that the war had started, that they'd started it, not that it was Russia that invaded Ukraine, which clearly obviously happened. And then he went as far as to say that he would wrap up peace talks and actually personally intervene to bring peace to this conflict by only having a meeting with Russia, not inviting Ukraine at all, which is crazy considering the fact that when you're trying to broker peace, you kind of need all sides directly involved in the war to get any kind of peace deal. You can't only talk to the aggressor and just disregard the victim who's on the defensive. And Trump's government has tried to force Ukraine into a financial deal, an economic deal over Ukraine's mineral resources that would give American access and rights to, and American companies the ability to extract a ton of Ukrainian mineral resources. So it's all part of this bizarre game now where suddenly Trump's government has completely changed the half a century and longer old tune of America's position on Russia. And at the same time, the South African government has been playing a really interesting foreign policy game, because ever since the US lashed out on all this baseless nonsense, this misinformation, this fake news about what is happening in South Africa, the South African government has been able to get all of the rest of the world, including major players, trade partners like the EU, to stand and say, we disagree with what America thinks is going on in South Africa. We stand with our friends in South Africa. All these different world leaders arrived for the G20 in South Africa, perfectly happy to be there, except America. And so the South African government, through its foreign policy, has been able to shore up relationships with all of the other major trading partners while they wait to see what kind of unpredictable insanity the American government does next. And then, genuinely, shockingly, President Ramaphosa of South Africa invited President Zelenskyy of Ukraine to have a state visit to South Africa. Now, It's a time of wildness in the world for Zelenskyy because he is legitimately facing a potential scenario where Donald Trump's America completely forsakes him, cuts off all funding and support, where the EU is not able to step in to fill the breach of that, which will seriously affect his ability to wage this defensive war against the Russian invasion. He's been isolated by that reality of Trump saying, screw you, we're not talking to you unless you sign this extremely unfair mineral deal. And he's looking for friends, he's looking for allies, he's looking for a change in narrative. And he's suddenly got an invitation to go on a state visit to a country which its government has steadfastly refused to pick a side in the very conflict that Zelenskyy has been suffering. It's a really wild thing for the South African government to do. It's sure to annoy Russia. It's sure to complicate any attempts by other countries to typecast South Africa as having one position or another position. It's probably also been done by South Africa to allow South Africa, in its own view, to continue to have relations with Russia, to invite Russian dignitaries to the G20, to have them here. By also inviting Zelenskyy on his own state visit, South Africa can continue to maintain that they're not picking a side between Russia and Ukraine. They simply want peace and are willing to talk with and trade with and be friends with everybody. And so it makes it harder to typecast South Africa one way or another, and it certainly makes it the whole thing far more confusing for Zelenskyy, for Russia, and for the United States, who've suddenly had to about face all of these MAGA anti-Russia Republicans and along with follow Trump's script and pretend that actually no, Russia is chill, Russia's not the problem here. And it's certainly going to be fascinating to see what happens next and whether or not the South African government's game that they're playing here is going to work, how it's going to unfold. Is it going to stop America and Trump's America with Musk and Afroforum and Solidarity in tow, like trying to punish South Africa for this alleged ill-treatment, mistreatment of white South Africans? Maybe not. But there may very well be good consequences for South Africa in the way that they're playing this game with the rest of the world. Thank you for watching.